On today's show, episode 20 of the Real Recovery podcast, we sit down with Amelia A, who shares her powerful journey from addiction to sobriety. Amelia opens up about her struggles, the impact on her family, and the transformative power of community and mutual aid.
Hello, and welcome to the Real Recovery Podcast. I'm Julie, your co-host. On this journey of healing and transformation, together with my co-host Peter, we dive into the heart of recovery, sharing stories that resonate with courage and inspiration.
That's right, Julie. Each episode is a new chapter in this vast narrative of recovery, and we're honored to bring them to you. But keep in mind, the perspectives you'll hear are for informational purposes only and may not reflect the views of the podcast or our partners.
Indeed, while these conversations can be a powerful part of your recovery toolkit, they are not substitute for professional medical advice. We encourage you to seek guidance from your healthcare provider for any treatment-related decisions.
And if you're facing an immediate crisis, or if you just need to talk to someone who understands, don't hesitate to call the Recovery Crisis Line at 503-223-85. The number is also on our website. Help is available 24/7.
Now let's begin our episode
Of recovery, real recovery.
I want to welcome you to the Real Recovery Podcast. We're here today with Amelia. I know Amelia from our meeting. Amelia will have the sexiest voice we've heard so far. Thank God. No.
Don't put me on the spot.
No. She sounds like she's on a radio show whenever she hosts the meeting. And I have not heard your full story. So some of the guys I've known forever.
Yeah.
I'm excited to hear your story.
Me too. And I'm Peter, and that was Julie speaking here with Amelia on the Real Recovery Podcast. Got to make sure we do our due diligence.
I was out late last night. I'm saying eating cheesecake. So
Yeah. Yum. I was thinking about this the other day, and I was like, I feel like my story's boring, but I also think that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Because addiction is a really common thing. It's more common than diabetes. And I think I always hear people talking about like people who are using drugs on the street. And I'm like, don't you realize that's a really small percentage of the population of people who use drugs?
You just see it. That's the difference.
Yeah, it's just not everybody has a house to live in. And I definitely feel like in my experience, I started drinking, using recreational drugs when I was a teenager, and it had its ups and downs, but by the time I knew that it was time to stop, had been a lot of downs for a long time. Yeah.
How did you grow up? I'm always curious because I feel like the backgrounds where you came from sometimes can have a lot of weight and bearing on how the addiction came into people's lives.
Yeah, so I'm from Dallas, Texas originally, and
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and my dad's family's from Cuba. My mom, on one side of her family, has been in Texas for 5 generations. But my parents met at Catholic church in the 70s, and there was addiction on both sides of my family, and a lot of different variations of it. My godfather, my dad's brother, had issues with addiction and died of AIDS in the 90s. And I think that was something that really shaped me, but also shaped just the way that, I don't know, I saw how people dealt with grief and dealt with addiction, dealt with queer people. This was at the height of the AIDS crisis. And sorry, I feel like really diving deep in, but...
No,
Okay.
And it really did feel like this was something that a lot of people thought was unspeakable. And being Cuban American, there is the season of The Real World with Pedro Zamora.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really how parents talked to us about it. Because we were not really allowed to watch MTV all that much. It was like, okay, you can sit down in front of the TV and watch The Real World and see this nice Cuban American boy who has HIV, who has AIDS. And I don't know, it was really so I feel like growing up around that was very alienating, and also just made me realize that there are parts of other people's pain that no one wants to talk about or see. and that there's just so much that's stigmatized. And I know, internalize that a lot. And I think this came up a lot during COVID to see all of us, really, not just a singular group of people, but all of us, like being left behind and not cared for, and no one looking out for us, which I think is part of what spurred me to finally get sober. I got sober in 2020, and I remember being on a Zoom call with a bunch of professional colleagues on May 23rd, the day that George Floyd was killed, and the video was starting to make the rounds, and it was a happy hour thing, and I was getting sloppy drunk, and everybody was just complaining about like their like quotidian lives, and I was like, haven't you seen this video? And it took me a while to even process that. I was like, I need to get my act together, because I'd been that stage of the pandemic had really brought on the isolation, and also just being on a fucking bender. Sorry if I
it's okay.
Yeah.
But it was a long
Drinking became acceptable, and for alcoholics, it's okay.
Well, and like I think a lot of people realize that like they didn't like drinking alone. I think growing up, I internalized a lot of things about like how you had to hide big feelings and really sad things in life from other people, and I think that definitely my drinking and using.
I'm not being able to. I'm from a Catholic family as well. And my grandfather was a full-fledged alcoholic. Always good to me. So let me put that out there. But it wasn't discussed. And I think the first time we ever discussed it was when I was going for hand surgery. And they asked me my medical background. And so I reached out to my aunts and I was like, hey, can you tell me about because my dad died really young and my mom died early. And so I didn't know the family history. And they gave it all to me. And I was like, whoa. Yeah. It was the first time they ever said publicly or writtenly, Grandpa was an alcoholic. And I was one to say, you think? But realizing that my mom, with it being hereditary, so sometimes or a lot of the times, my mom is the firstborn child. And they say the firstborn or the first male is the first to get it. And where my Aunt Kathy is the seventh child and the last male, she's just like my grandmother. She doesn't have any addictions, whatever. She's flawless. And so is my Aunt Patty, who's the fourth or the fifth child. But my mom and the oldest male, absolutely 100%.
Yeah, I think it's like a meme right now. I'm talking about oldest daughter syndrome. I'm the oldest daughter of an oldest daughter.
A child.
I'm like, dang.
And my daughter's an only child of two addictive parents. Yeah.
So, but I think it's true. It's like you take on, like, you become more of an adult than your peers at an earlier age. And you see what's going on with adults and their various traumas more than, I think, kids who are allowed to be kids longer.
And I don't think we know how to process it. I've said this in a meeting. There are years that I blocked out my childhood and just, it didn't even exist. And I guess there comes a time when it's the right time. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, when I was young, I have a very creative mind. And so I would go into these fantasies, mind fantasies, to escape the reality because I didn't want to deal with that. That was my way of getting away from it all or quelling those feelings that I had. I could be a rock star in my head or go to space or do all these
I think that's how I use sports.
Yeah.
Sports, you're sad if your team loses, but sports were a really good way for me to escape everything and just focus on the game. And I will tell you, I've done that as an adult. I don't watch the news. We talk about it all the time. Amelia's a fellow basketball girl, but there's no getting murdered or hurt in the game. The worst thing that happens is my team loses. Yeah.
Which is, I don't know. I think sports are really interesting. And I think sports teach me so much about being present because we're all there and we all care. And we're all focusing on one thing, which could if we knew how it was going to end up, we would not be there. Yeah, but I think sports also, did you ever listen to We Can Do Hard Things? It's like Abby Wambach, who's a World Cup winning soccer player. But she talks about how in the big games, she knows she was there, but it wasn't her.
You know, we're talking about the short blonde-haired one.
Oh, no.
Okay.
Abby Wambach's a tall forward, but
Married to...
no, she's married. So she's married to Glenn and Dowell, who used to be like a Christian mom blogger. And they have a podcast, We Can Do Hard Things, which is all about like addiction. And of course, it's in recovery. And
I was just trying to remember which one got arrested for DUI in Portland.
oh, that was Wambach.
Okay.
We could talk about recovery memoirs because I love a celebrity, but Abby Wambach's celebrity recovery memoir has a part where like, she gets arrested for DUI in Portland. She goes to the drunk tank in Birkenstock.
I actually remembered that night because it was all over ESPN. And I was like, 'cause she was my girl, like my hero, like being from the West Coast and whatnot. And then she introduced Caitlyn Jenner at the ESPY Awards, and which I was like, whoa. But I was like, no, she didn't. I was shocked. Yeah.
And I think we've all been there. We've all like done sloppy shit and had to go deal with the consequences of our actions while we're wearing Birkenstocks or other impractical footwear.
I'm so glad that I was never a celebrity during my drinking days, because oh my gosh, it's bad enough to go through what you go through, but then to have it splashed all over the news channels and all over the tabloids. And
for me, they did an article in the newspaper, but they didn't publish my name. They were like 5 escort services busted, and I was like,
uh-oh.
Oh yeah. And my friend was like, you made it to the newspaper, and I was like, what? But luckily my mugshot wasn't put there because it was an ugly picture. It really was. So in 2020, did you go to our meeting? When did you start going to our meeting?
I started going to the fellowship that we're probably 2021, 2022, because I am a stubborn person. And I was like, I'm going to quit drinking, but I don't think I'm an alcoholic.
Okay. Yeah.
And, growing up in the family I did, like, I was very skeptical of 12-step stuff, like, because I would be at this relative's house or that relative's house, and there'd be, like, an NA key tag or a coin from this or a coin from that, like, thrown in a drawer, and meanwhile, so-and-so is still, like, dealing with active addiction. I'm like, this shit doesn't work.
Yeah.
Which, it took a lot of time for me to get over it, and also took a long time for me to, like, find a place where I felt welcome and that felt like home. And
Amen.
Yeah. And I was still very much, I am a Zoom baby. I love a Zoom meeting, but the fellowship that we're all part of is actually the closest one to my home. And that is how I found it. I was like looking at the meeting. I was like, okay, where is the closest one? And then I was like, oh, wait, this is a queer meeting. And I started coming, and I kept coming back. So.
Same. I went to one NA meeting, came to our meeting, and I had to get slip signed for the parole officer. And I knew I was in a safe place right away. And it took Peter a minute to get to that meeting.
Yeah.
And then he felt like he was in a safe place.
Yeah. And there's something to be said about being comfortable. You can go to a meeting like I did for a long time and hear AA and talk AA. But if you're not comfortable, you're not living AA. At least I wasn't.
Yeah. And I think that it's something to be said. It's one, I felt at home in our home group. I was able to feel at home in other places much easier. I've gone to meetings and I've traveled, like small town Alaska, and these are places where maybe I don't have as much in common with folks. But like having had the experiences that I've had in this fellowship and other fellowships, that it's like there's something about the program that allows you to see how your story is the same as everybody else's. And,
We are.
and how you're all battling the same battle.
Yeah. When was it that you first turned to alcohol, or you said you were trying to escape in your childhood from certain things, or?
Yeah, definitely like teens, 20s. It was like, oh my gosh, I feel like the whatever it is go away. Like the awkwardness, the shyness, the like pain, like all that lifts. And I think it's alcohol's a progressive thing. I drank every day from the time I was in my mid 20s to I quit when I was 39. And there were pills in the mix. So there was weed, there were powders too, but alcohol was the thing that I came home to always. Yeah.
And it's legal. I know some of the others are now, but even during the pandemic, you could get alcohol.
Yeah.
And I was grateful because I was wondering what the world would come to without it. Yeah, I was like worried.
No, there's so many functional alcoholics
That's
in the
what
world.
I mean. Like I was wondering what they were. I live near a liquor store.
Yeah.
And that place, I go to get my nails done there.
Yeah.
And that place is thriving.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah. And I was like, what would these people do? And I think they thought about that.
No, it was a public health crisis. It's a public health crisis, but we would have an even bigger public health crisis on our hands if everybody had to detox from alcohol at the same time.
I agree with you 100%.
Yeah.
That's what I was worried about.
It's a wake-up call, I think, when you realize, like...
How did you come to that realization? Like you were every day, you get your whatever drink of choice and relax, and it turned into a daily thing. And how did...
Oh, I was definitely, people use the term wine mom, but I'm definitely a recovering wine mom. I'm like, that is just so normalized in our society.
Yeah.
Like,
oh, yeah.
And it's just, like, there's the wine shop on my corner. And
it was convenient.
Yeah. Like, for so many years, I was like, oh, I know so much about wine. I know so much about craft beer. And that's something that I think has always been like an escape for me, or an outlet for my addictive personality. It's I know about this and that and this region and this variety, and it felt like it was like a hobby,
right?
Not just self-destruction.
A passion. You no, I get what you're saying.
And I think for some people, like, they can, but like those are normies. Yeah. I don't know, but I've had several wake-up calls over the years. I had a former drinking buddy of mine several years before I stopped, but she had to go to detox because she had to stop drinking for a medical procedure. And I was like, holy shit. Like, she's a real drinker. Meanwhile, like,
yeah,
I drank as much as she did. And also, my now husband, like, he got gout a couple years before I quit. And once again, like, that is a progressive disease that, like, once he stopped drinking, like, he's a normie, so, like, he can have a glass of wine and not finish it at dinner, which I'm just like, what is wrong with you? But it was like, oh, when he stopped drinking every day, or stopped drinking as much as I did, this autoimmune disease that he has developed, like, the symptoms went away. So, that was definitely a wake-up call. But really, I think it was the multiple crises that we all faced in 2020 that made me realize I am all I have. And I can be drunk and I can keep drinking like this, or I can stop. But there was a couple of years where I knew I had to stop, and tried and failed multiple times. So
how was your life being affected by, like, what were I'm just trying to get at things that others who maybe are listening and haven't realized it for themselves yet, like, what were some of the signs or troubles, if you will, that where you're like, oh yeah.
So I think one thing that was like both very normalized and very problematic in my life is that I worked for a tech company where we had kegs in the break room.
Oh.
And,
my kind of company. No.
Well, and also it being a very like male environment, like for many years, like drinking was the thing I could do to show that I was one of the boys, which I was never going to be. But, and also it was a way for me to drink away, like, the, like, everyday insults and ego injuries of being in a world that really rejects you. So, I don't know. I remember in the place where I worked, there was a keg of, there was always like 6 or 7 kegs, and one of them was wine. So, of course, like, it was at first, like, beer o'clock was at 5, but then beer o'clock moved to 4, it moved to 3, it moved to noon. And I remember one time, like, having a pint glass full of wine at my desk, and a lot of people had left the office, but it was maybe 3 or 4 in the afternoon, and, like, nearly fucking falling off my chair.
Wow.
And meanwhile, I still got on my bike or got on the bus and went and picked my kid up from aftercare at 6. And that was just that was a normal day in my life. And looking back on that, I was like, okay, that had to end. And it was actually leaving that job that I did around the same time as I finally quit drinking. Like, I think it was a sort of, I had to bookend it. I had to be like, this part of my life is over.
Yeah, it would be hard to get sober in an environment like that, I would think, where you're just constantly teased. Like for me, I would be like, "There's that wine cake's mine, Peter." I'd put my name on it.
Yeah, and when I got sober, I didn't go around anyone from the past or anything. I still, I say this often. If you use, you're not in my life.
Yeah.
It's too much. It's too overwhelming.
Yeah, and it's not safe for me.
Especially in the early days.
I don't have the urge to use at all. Yeah. I've gone through more crises in the last 5 years than I have and whatnot, but never once have I said, oh, let's go, whatever. It's just, I really try to, just really try to be safe. Our meeting was safe for me when I worked at Sprint, and I only mention them because they're no longer, so I can't get sued. But at Sprint, it was a really family atmosphere where everyone knew I was sober, so it was really safe. Like, I would go to my meetings on Friday. And I remember when I went to go to court to get my record expunged, my boss, the first thing she said, yay or nay, how was it? And that I could be that honest was like, Katie Wapniarski, if you're listening, I love you. Yeah.
I know for me in the early days, just even going to family functions, because I came from a family where, 5 o'clock happy hour, that was the thing that marked the day in a big way. And every event, birthdays, holidays, it was raise a glass. And for the first few times I was like, okay, give me my grape juice. I was so awkward about it. It was terrible. So how was it for you as your journey began in sobriety?
I do think that like the pandemic was a mixed blessing because there was no forced socializing. Like I was working remotely at that job that had the kegs in the break room and a beer culture. So certainly I was willing and able to keep it up for a while, but I was able to be removed from that, and I was able to, there just weren't a lot of. And like that summer, like one of the things that I think helped me like remain sober was the Black Lives Matter movement. And so like the only place to socialize was a protest that summer.
I love that.
It was my fellow wine moms, like they were not sitting around. And, I have so many friends who, are normies. Like this was not an environment where like they could drink wine. Like, so... Yeah, I think that really helped. And also, I think the beautiful thing about sobriety is that, like, any sort of FOMO, like, you just lose that sense of FOMO. Like, I'm not afraid of missing out because it's good for me to be missing out on the drunk mess that I would be.
Yeah. How was your husband? Was he involved in your recovery or?
Definitely. Like he is a normie. He always has been. So he drinks a lot less now, and we don't really have it in the house. And I think a lot of our friends and once again, like I think the pandemic just interrupted a lot of things, but whereas before it was social life that revolved around like going out and going to cocktails and having a cocktail before dinner and having a glass of wine and more booze afterwards. Like that got really interrupted. And yeah, so now it's, yeah, I think both of us have been on a journey, although like his is not about addiction. It's just about general health. But even now, like he drinks non-alcoholic beer. Like beer's never really been my thing. So I know it's a very controversial topic in the rooms. Non-alcoholic beer is for non-alcoholics. I feel like I can have an NA beer every now and then because beer's never really been my thing. But
I think beer's disgusting.
But non-alcoholic wine, I will not touch it with a 10-foot pole because I've had people like pour it for me, and oftentimes like you'll go to somebody's house and like they're gonna drink wine, so like they're like, oh, I got you this non-alcoholic wine. And it's like, thanks. But I'm like, this is grape juice, and it just makes me want the real thing.
Interesting. I'm curious about that because I'd like to. What I did was I graduated into figuring out, because I love to entertain, and I spend that whole. I looked for the mocktail kind of world, the NA world, and I found some really cool. And actually, I can make some really good mocktails, non-alcoholic drinks.
For me, a diet soda, because I stopped drinking soda. So like when we go out and I get a Diet Coke, that's like frickin' partying for me. And I love fizzy water.
Yes.
The snowstorm, Peter and Justin came and got me. We went to the most cleared off roadway, which was Winco. And all I cared about was getting fizzy water.
Yeah.
I had plenty of food, but it was all about the fizzy water. That to me, it does it for me, like that, or some Pellegrino with a lime, you know, something. Yeah.
Yeah. And the mocktails, like I'll even go, if we go to, like we love to go to Mexican food, and I'll have a virgin margarita or whatever.
Yeah.
Having that I don't feel like I've ever thought, oh, I really would like to have the real thing. It's just, this is good tasting and it's something I can have. That's the way I look at it. But I'm curious if, like you said, wine, if you have the free wine, I think it's called, or something like that, that can make you feel like you...
Yeah, like my husband will get it like as a treat for himself. And I'm like, no, not for me. But I love a mocktail. I love Somme drinking vinegar. That to me is a real treat. But if I am going out with people, I will sometimes have half a Red Bull with some
I
juice.
might as well be high on crack.
I know.
That is, you
can tell I'm going buck wild.
Yeah, that's
the 2 or 3 times a year I go out and have a Red Bull.
I get high off of a Diet Coke, and I drink coffee. Like right now, I have some medication that I'm tired, and coffee has been the go-to. And I usually only have one, but
see, I don't like the energy drinks because that's what I used to drink to come off of.
Do you know I've never had
a hangover
ever?
So that reminds me of those hangover
I've never
days.
had an energy drink ever.
Like Red Bull, that's it.
I've never had one.
Oh, you haven't?
No,
you're not missing
probably
much.
For the best.
Yeah, it's funny. I grew up in the 90s, 2000s, and like coffee was like a cool thing. Like it was like alongside like beer or wine. Like it's something that like, and I find that like younger like coworkers, younger friends are really into energy drinks. I'm like snobby about it. I'm like, why wouldn't you just have coffee? Meanwhile, like I have a totally unhealthy relationship with coffee. No place to judge.
I have a question for you because I met you a while ago online, over a year ago, when I was doing online meetings, big time. So you got sober on Zoom. What was it like for you getting sober on Zoom and then coming into the rooms? So for me, it's reverse. I was always in the rooms. I feel bad because I think it would have helped me. I don't know that I would have done it as much, but I didn't know extended family was online during the pandemic. And it could have saved Izzy about 5,000 phone calls, but that was my meeting every day. But yeah. So what was it like coming into the room after getting sober on Zoom?
So I think one of the things they always say that connection is the opposite of addiction. And I think one of the things that made our fellowship just a really welcoming place for me was knowing that there was like a geographical base that was close by, and that y'all were folks not in the neighborhood, but also like throughout the city, throughout the world, with the same base. And definitely I go to more in-person meetings. It depends. It really depends. Like I've had COVID twice in the last 6 months, which has really sucked. So like that put a damper on going to in-person meetings. But I try to go to an in-person meeting once a week or so. But I do think that the fact that our fellowship was rooted in a real place is part of what has made it stick for me. And I do think that people always say, oh, it's not the same. I'm like, yeah, no, Coke is not the same as Pepsi, but
it is, right?
Yeah.
No, can I tell you, we know some people in the fellowship that say that too, but I will tell you, for me, and I didn't know it could be this way from only going to the rooms until COVID, right? I get so happy to see the people that go online.
Yeah.
I couldn't go in person on Friday, and I went online, and God was looking out for me because it was exactly what I needed, and I wouldn't have gotten it in the room that day just because it was different. Fred had come back for the first time without his foot, and we were talking about how do you deal with your sober shit, and listening to him, and then Al, and then Matt in New York, Florida, which I wouldn't have gotten. It was like some really good shit.
Yeah.
And I was so freaking grateful that I went online that day.
Yeah.
But I just feel like it gives me a chance to see more people from our group. And it gives me a chance to see the people who can't get there.
Yeah, exactly.
And then I'll see them on Friday, right, when I go. And I work Sunday through Thursday. I can't get to the noon meeting Sunday through Thursday. So Friday, I touch base with my room people.
Yeah.
And what works best for me is at 6 p.m. when I'm off work and my brain hurts. And that's often. It soothes my soul just listening to people. I'm like, you soothe my soul. When you talk, like, it's crazy for me that I can be batshit crazy from stuff or being stressed and go to a meeting online and just listen. And let's say I'm a 15. I'm like a 2 by the time I leave.
Yeah.
And then I can get whatever's in my head out of it. I know I suffer from rumination. I didn't know that until I went to IOP. And I can get out of it just by going to a meeting that is free. I mean, you can donate if you want to, but it's like our podcast. It's free, and hopefully you'll get something from it, right?
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, I think the fact that 12-step groups are mutual aid, one of the biggest mutual aid projects in the world, and we are addressing one of the biggest public health problems. It's really like during the pandemic, I got involved doing mutual aid with food, with other like social justice things, but realizing that there was this really powerful group in my own neighborhood that was addressing just like one of the most urgent like social health issues.
Especially.
Yeah, it's so powerful. And I think just being there, just witnessing it is so powerful.
Agreed.
I always knit in meeting. My goal is to be the older lady knitting in meeting years and years from now, because when my hands are busy, my ears are open.
I love it.
And
I love that. And I love that you brought that up, because that was something that I was going to bring up, because I've been to different meetings where there's different people that do some are threading beads,
Put lip
knitters,
gloss on.
and I
Like
always
10
wondered,
times.
why do you do that in meetings? Because I haven't felt the urge to do
yeah,
that myself, but so I was curious about it, and I like that what you said, that busy hands keep the ears open.
yeah, I have a friend who
That is good.
Yeah.
I have a friend from another fellowship who is a mental health professional. And I was like, yeah, and we was talking to another person who is also a knitter. And she was like, yeah, I knit alcoholically.
And I was like, me too. I love it. But how productive, right?
But it's I love to knit and watch soccer, but it keeps you present. And it calms your mind in a way. And my friend who's it's a stim. I was like, yes, it is.
Please forgive me. What's a stem?
So this is I think this is something like with folks who are neurodivergent, like having something to fidget with or touch or just like a gesture. Like, I'm not a professional. I don't know all about this, but it's like a fidget toy.
I'm not joking.
Yeah.
Have lip gloss. Carmex in every meeting. I probably put it on, I don't know, 5 or 6 times, and I hold the tube in my hand when I'm online. So I didn't know it was that, but I'm just saying. And then Lacey told me we take one of the same medications. And she said my lips have gotten really dry since I took it. And the Carmex thing became a thing when I went on the medicine because my lips feel dry all the time.
Interesting.
But I could see where it could be that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
One of the things I wanted to circle back to was you struggled a little bit when you first got sober. And so you decided I need to do something. You went to did you go to or you went online first? Was how you started?
Yeah, I went to a couple of different online meetings and I did Al-Anon first, actually.
Wow.
Because I was like, oh, I had to quit drinking and that was a struggle. These other people in my life, they're the real they're the real problem. I think Al-Anon is wonderful and I should spend more time doing it. But it took a little while in Al-Anon to be like, I've got some problems too. Maybe I can start with me. Anyway. So yeah, did a couple of, and I've done various meetings, but it was, and like, I'll be very frank, I went to some women's meetings, which like, I was like, come on, like, there's just a lot of self-flagellation, and every meeting is different, but there's a lot of self-flagellation, and there's something about our fellowship. One of my first memories of you, Julie, is being in the old space in the basement and you sharing about how something that kept you sober was meeting someone that you wanted to punch in the face. I was like, that Julie, she's a real one. And just hearing like folks from all ages like talk about their past adventures, but also like just showing up with like such courage and grace. I'm like, okay, this is the right place for me.
I hope our listeners don't hate me. But women's meetings are not my best thing, and I'm just being honest. When we were at the North Coast Roundup, we went to 2 LGBTQ meetings, which made me humble because they came from small towns and didn't have a meeting like ours. And so they felt very, not only are they uncomfortable in their sobriety or their addiction, but they were uncomfortable at their meeting. And I felt so sorry for them because we were like, we're online.
And that is such an amazing thing about Zoom is that folks who don't have a meeting that in their town.
Yeah, but we went to a women's meeting there as well. And then we went to some really good speaker meetings, which were amazing. But the women's meeting was not my favorite out of all of them, and I don't know. And it's just about, I wasn't uncomfortable. I'm good like that now. But because I used to feel judged. Who wants to tell these bunch of women my past, which is huge. But it was just a lot. Let's just say that. And I wasn't uncomfortable, the sobriety part, but I didn't feel as welcomed as I do in our meeting. I guess that's the best thing to say. And I don't know what it is about that meeting. Because I've been to a lot of meetings. I just chaired one, which was very unique for me at Another Chance Recovery Center last Tuesday. And homelessness and whatnot might be a small part of addiction. But in that room, it was a common theme. And there was a couple people just really grateful that they had gotten a place to live. It was very humbling. It was humbling getting in the car. It was humbling having clean clothes.
Yeah.
It was like wicked humbling. And I felt comfortable there, though I was nervous to go. But I really got something out of it. It's just, I'm doing a CMA meeting next. And I've never been to one. And that was my drug of choice. So
for those that don't know.
Yeah, I've never drunk and drive, which is very rare for a person who's in AA. My mom forbid it and said she'd take my car away. And I think seeing her get 2 DUIs, one in Massachusetts, then she got her license in New Hampshire, then she got her license in Maine. Okay, so, and one time she pinched me really hard and I started crying because it was like hurt. And the police, I didn't know, the police came up to the window and she's sorry, she's sick, I'm sorry. And I was like, and as soon as he went away, I was like, why? She pinched me. She goes, it worked. And I like didn't get it. I didn't get it for years. I was just like, I have a bruise? Yeah.
Now, you have kids, children.
Yeah, I have one kid.
And were they affected at all, or how was...
I was thinking about our meeting, which is LGBT plus and allies.
I like how you put it, plus.
Yeah, well,
no,
yeah.
I think that's a great
and
way.
One of the things that our fellowship was just so helpful for me is that around the time I got sober, my kid came out as non-binary, and we've had some explorations across gender labels, and that sort of cracked open the way that I thought about gender. And definitely made me realize, okay, well, like, I identify as a woman and I'm happy being a woman, but binary gender is for the birds. But I think one of the things that was really such a gift of sobriety was being able to be present with my kid, not only during this massive societal crisis, but also being able to be present and supportive for them as they figured out who they were. And kids are we're all always figuring out who they are,
right.
But yeah.
Well, and how accepting from a parent. Some don't understand. We talked about that a lot on the show. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of guys that went through it when they were young. Like,
yeah. And like having grown up, like seeing that, I think something that's just really healing for me is to be around folks. I think one of the things that's like amazing about our fellowship is that there are people who are 16, there are people who are 96, and there's people from all walks of life.
Yep.
But I think being around guys from the older generation, many of whom have been living with HIV and AIDS I don't want to make this about me, but it has really healed my soul on a level. I just see like folks who are able to overcome and recover from the substance from addiction.
And they don't complain about it.
Yeah, and live their best lives.
Exactly. No, it's just, I don't talk about the trigeminal neuralgia very often. I don't. Because I feel I have a guy that has 7 stents in his heart and all he cares about is showing up to the meeting. We have another guy that had a heart attack and he was mad he couldn't be at the Friday meeting. And we have this guy, Dowell, and I know he wouldn't mind me mentioning his name. Dowell is one of the longest AIDS sobriety person in Oregon. He was already sober and he was one of the people who tested out medicine when I first came in, and he's still here.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. So I agree with you. And there's this guy, James, and I owe everything to him. But the first day I went to the meeting, he said, are you going to come back tomorrow? And I came back the next day because I promised him I would.
Yeah.
And he kept saying it every day. So, Julie, I'm going to see you tomorrow. And James had AIDS.
No.
And he had probably the 5 best years of his life in AA. Told me, absolutely. Mm-hmm. And medicine wasn't as good then. And I only went rafting, which wasn't my thing. Because he talked me into it and he fell out of the boat and under the boat and I scooped him up. Again, him showing up and when he was sick, not being able to go to the meeting. And then this guy, Pat, Gary's best friend, when we were at the old MCC, came in at Thanksgiving, and I knew he was spending it at Gary's house, but he had his oxygen tank. And I was like, how's it going? Always had a good attitude. He was dying from cancer. And I was like, are you looking forward to Thanksgiving? Lifted up his shirt and showed me the feeding tube. And he says, not really, but it'll be good company at Gary's house. And I was like, this man. And so I try not to be a whiner about stuff because there's a lot of guys in our group that,
And growing up in Dallas and losing many like family members and friends to AIDS. And during that time, like there was this famous performance by the Turtle Creek Chorale where it was the surviving member. It was after a certain number of years, like so many people had died. And there was a performance where it's like the surviving members were in white. And then there were folks standing in who were wearing black with like their faces. But anyway, like that image is always seared in my head. And I think with recovery and just like the way that things have changed, medications have gotten so much better, like realizing being an addict is not a death sentence. The way that when I was growing up, AIDS was the death sentence. The way that, and the way that we in community can advocate for ourselves and take care of each other and also live our freaking best lives. It's really healing. And it is just something that's like a guiding principle of my life, is that no one's coming to save us. But we can save ourselves and save each other.
Agreed.
Very well put. I'm curious, how are you involved? Do you do service work, or what does that mean to you? I guess everybody does service work in their own ways, but I'm curious what your take is on that.
Yeah, I wish I had more time to do service work, but I have been a part of mutual aid projects around food justice off and on over the years since the pandemic. I Zoom host weekly for our fellowship, which is one of the most rewarding rewarding hours like of my life. Like,
Amelia is a great Zoom host.
I just love like being back. I love that it makes me get my butt to a meeting and seeing the same people, seeing new people, seeing people you haven't seen in a while. Yeah, and I also try to help out like with like just neighborhood efforts around food, shelter, that sort of thing, and also just trying to be present.
Can I ask a really personal question? And this comes, I guess, from my experience.
Yeah.
So my daughter was 4 3/4, 5 when I got sober. So she's always been around AA. Everyone she's known, that's my friend almost, and if they were either work. So does your child, do they know, and how do they feel about it?
So
just for some mom that's out there or whatnot.
I have been lucky in that I have a partner who's very supportive and who my child loves so much. And I also, my child's other parent is present in their lives. So I usually try to keep my sort of fellowship during the time that I am not responsible for them. But once again, Zoom is amazing because there's definitely been times where I'm like, mom has to go to a meeting, like I'll be in the bedroom, come get me if you want, or zooming in on the phone while I'm like in the car during soccer practice or that sort of thing. But I am very upfront with my kid and I'm upfront with other kids I know about, like I'm an addict, like I have an addictive personality, like alcohol was the main thing, but I can't do that. Like recently I was talking with my kid, I bought a weed whacker, and because I have bought a new house and I have to take care of both lawns at the moment. And my kid was like, yeah, and you whacked weed out of your life.
I love it. And I'm like, yes. You say like when that's funny because I didn't take her to a lot of meetings because I didn't want her to hear people's stories. Mm-hmm. I kept the addiction part away from her, not the recovery. Like until she got older and she could understand it. Just like my crime. Oh, I got in big trouble. Yeah. I never said what it was until, I don't know, she must have been when she could really understand it. She's our biggest podcast fan.
Yes.
So was the first person to listen, the first person to like us. And luckily, she's so proud. And her friends are like, following your podcast. So it's really been a cool thing because her generation is so podcast on their phones. Oh, my God.
I think, this kind of,
Peter's sexy.
whether it's our podcast or others out there, but I remember when I was early in the program, and I was reading the book, and it was like one of the early editions, and they're talking about the housewife and all these things that I'm like, what? When is this from? It's nice to have the current today's stories to put out there and for people to be able to relate to.
I have a second and a third edition. It wasn't until I was off work and I went to a big book study and they said what page to go to in the stories. And I was like, what is going on? My book doesn't match.
I was there too.
So I went and got a fourth edition the next Wednesday so that I could, and I was like, what page are we on? And to see if it matched up because, and then Al got me a second edition.
Yeah, I will say that parenting nowadays, especially in the age of fentanyl, I think it's really important to talk to my kid and to other kids, not just about addiction and substance abuse as a public health issue. Like, I have a good friend who is a street medic, and she was putting together harm reduction kits. It was like, hey, do you guys want to come over and help out? And I was like, hell yeah. And it was me and my kid and like her kids and another neighbor kid. And she was like, we were putting together like intravenous Narcan kits and fentanyl test strips. And it was amazing because she's an angel and like she was able to do this so like age appropriate.
Professionally,
Yeah. And so like she showed us how to inject Narcan using an orange and showed us how to use a fentanyl test strip using Chex Mix. Like, so we ground up some Chex Mix.
Wow, that's
awesome.
Genius.
Like, it's just
unfortunate we have that,
but not knowing is worse.
But
I agree.
Yeah, and it's like a former neighbor of mine lost her son to fentanyl at age 15, and within like our Southeast Portland community, there have been several deaths over the past few years. So this is a real like public health issue that is affecting like people of all ages.
Yeah.
But I think with kids, it's really,
you know, I knew on TV and I see there's a special part in my neighborhood, basically Clinton Street.
Yeah.
It's like a drive-through. But when our guy, and rest in peace, Chase, I had gotten really close to Chase when I was going to the church every day when my condo was under construction. And he was so kind and I'll sponsor you. I'll help you get started. It didn't matter who it was. He was just so generous. And to get high one time after being sober 3 years and to go and was leaving to Germany on the foreign exchange program on his junior year at my school,
oh my God.
PSU. And for him to be gone the next week. And had I not been off work, I have his picture on my phone because he had a cool hat one day. And I was like, I need a hat like that. Can I get a picture of it? And that was the first time, because I don't go around anyone that uses.
No.
The first time the fentanyl really hit me. And like just poof, you're gone one time.
Yeah.
And since then, there's been 4 or 5 people from our group. And it is, when you say crisis, I say this often on this podcast, but Portland is number 1 in addiction and 55th in treatment services available. It's the ratio is insane.
Yeah.
And you think about someone told me recently that like both addiction is more common than diabetes and that accidental overdose is the leading cause of death for Americans under the age of 50. And it's just...
Can you say that again? I just want our...
So the leading cause of death for folks under the age of 50 in America these days is accidents. But the number 1 category of accidents is accidental opioid overdose.
Wow.
So that is like fentanyl is killing more folks than car accidents. Like it's killing more folks than suicide. Like it is...
I don't think people realize.
Yeah.
Because I go into the treatment center and I speak to women and for GTD.
Yeah.
And I don't think people realize. But I also want people on the podcast to realize that, like, when we had the podcast last week, seeing the guys that have made it like in GTD, like that were like, there is hope.
Yeah.
You can do it. Find a meeting that's right for you. And if you go to a meeting that's not right, don't give up. Keep
Don't
going.
give up. Yeah.
I think any given the fact that it's like you can drive anywhere and you see a dialysis center. Yeah. And like just think about all of the resources that are put into like other like serious illnesses. But like addiction is the only like major illness where people will sit around and debate, oh, do you deserve treatment? Like, oh, blah, blah, blah. No one would say, oh, someone with diabetes deserves to die. And, is insulin really like helping the problem, or hurting the problem?
Literally. No.
But like the discourse around, I don't know. Sorry to get on the soapbox about it.
No, and you're right, because it's not a pretty disease.
Yeah.
And it's not accepted amongst you know what I'm saying? But it is out there.
Yeah.
I think too, at least with alcohol, it's a money maker. It's a profitable thing for this, because it's the taxes and everything that are on it. It's so readily available. The stigmatism of it there's all these reasons and yet pot, boy, that should be illegal, and that's a horrible drug. And wait a minute, you look at what pot does, the amount of damage compared to alcohol, and you're like, this doesn't seem right. Why is this?
Just even and I think that like alcohol made me like much more pliant and in some ways productive, just going along with stuff. But like person, I think a lot of the reason why like as like a young mom, a new mom, like alcohol was, oh, mom deserves a drink because you're not getting support. Because at the time I was married to someone who would travel on business for 6 weeks at a time and I didn't have family nearby.
It's hard.
Alcohol was there and it was like condoned.
Yeah.
And it's funny.
It's a reward.
Yeah.
You
My mother was
deserve
a
it.
bartender.
Yeah.
Like she had a fix for everything. Cream de mint if you had a stomach ache. Bloody Mary if you had a hangover. If you're cold, hot toddy. I'm just saying, she had her own medicinal cabinet.
It's mind-blowing that, okay, like substance abuse in our culture is like very rewarded and encouraged in some ways, but the addiction and the disease behind it, like, it's like, why would we waste money treating addicts?
And my saddest thing on that is it takes a lot to want to get treatment.
Yeah.
It's a big thing, especially if you're on the street, right?
Yeah.
And is there a bed for you?
Yeah.
When you have that moment of clarity, and you go for treatment.
We don't have beds.
Maybe not.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, I've heard people at Fora in the women, right? It took them 6 tries.
Yeah.
And the lady was like, I just kept showing up and finally I got in.
Yeah.
But kudos to her. It's not always that case.
Right.
Like, is the next time they're not going to be there from the time they showed up.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, I want to share another statistic. Sorry, I'm being a real nerd.
No, it's okay.
It's like less than 15% of all folks with substance abuse disorders ever receive any sort of treatment. And that includes like just talk therapy.
Wow.
And so once again, I think mutual aid groups, 12-step groups, we are doing the work that no one else
I agree with you.
doing.
There's 10 million addicts that still show up to work because it pays for their habit.
Yeah.
I was reading in this class we took at work, and I was like, and these are the ones we don't know about.
Oh, yeah.
That we don't see on the street.
Yeah.
And that are probably not as productive as an employee that's not. But I was shocked at the amount of functional addicts there was, or you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah, I was definitely a quote unquote functional addict and alcoholic for many years. I was going to, I feel like, especially with a lot of women, it's never, I think sometimes I thought, okay, if it gets really bad, it'll be like on TV and like my family will have an intervention. I'm like, nobody's going to have an intervention for me. Because I am minimize, normalize, keep up appearances. And I think a lot of very functional addicts, like, will carry on, keep calm and carry on. Like, very few people, like, will have the resources or the opportunity to have a sort of, like, dramatic moment.
Yeah, so if you're out there, please know, keep trying.
Yeah.
If you weren't successful the first time, to get to detox or treatment. I had a timeout. That's the way I look at it. I think for me, getting in trouble, I was so ashamed of it. But now I feel like it is probably what saved me. The 6 months timeout was really good for me. Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's what people need is a timeout.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're getting close to our
Yeah,
time here, but I love it. I love that we can sit and just chat. I could chat for hours,
Yeah.
but I'm curious as we wind down, when you, what, for your parting words, if you will, when you feel the overwhelm or feel the urge that I gotta escape, and you're feeling that trigger, that moment,
Yeah.
what do you do for yourself? And what maybe advice, if you will, or that you could share with others that help?
Let's see. There's a lot of things that I think just help me like connect and focus. Probably my favorite is working in the garden.
De-stress. That's my
Yeah, it's a form of prayer for me because this is me saying what I'm doing today is going to have an impact on tomorrow. Yeah. I also have a weighted blanket, which I think everybody should have. Weighted blanket and golden
My
girl.
dog is my weighted blanket.
No, I love that because you know what? Both those things you can do, not waiting for other stuff. And I agree with you. I have a bunch of flowers being waiting on my patio to plant. And except for having hand surgery weeks ago, normally that's what I always tell Peter I love about my condo is that I have a yard. And I didn't get that until I was in AA. Peter tells me the name of my flowers. I just plant them because they're pretty. And I'm not joking.
What type of gardening do you do?
No, absolutely.
I try to do as much edible as possible. So herbs, greens. The new place I inherited some espaliered apple trees, pear trees, as long as a lot of berries. But I'm going to do raised beds there to do more vegetables because I love being able to grow food, not just for myself and my family, but to share with others.
Yeah. I'm the same exact way.
And it's something that we can do to prepare for a crisis, not to get...
That's true.
And can I tell you that going and getting that food, that fresh food, is so much better than getting the canned goods that everybody donates. So and thank God for that. Don't get me wrong, but there's nothing like a fresh vegetable.
Yeah. And my therapist tells me that when you dig your fingers in the dirt, it triggers serotonin in your brain.
I didn't know that's really a great...
Yeah. And another thing I learned recently is that evergreens, like big conifers, like they emit a compound that like reduces pain. So I love to take a walk at Mount Tabor or any other like green space, and
walking my dog is a huge win for me. If I'm like stressing, I'll take a break and I'll walk the dog and I can get out of it as well. Yeah. Sometimes it's just putting one foot in front of the other.
Yeah. And for me, I had a hard time when I first got into the program with God. I was like, because that dredged up a lot of religious connotations and I wasn't accepted by the church, in my church.
Yeah.
And growing up. So nature became, in essence, my God. It's my spiritual connection to the world. Yeah. And so gardening, of course, I'm in it. And then I do the walking with my dog, usually at the Sandy Delta, 1,000 acres.
Lovely.
And get out there and just...
I love Powell Butte, too, since we're by there.
Yeah.
Duke has attitude, though, when he sees huge dogs.
Just on a clear day, like seeing the mountains from Powell Butte. And once again, I always have a very evolving sense of like God and whatnot, but like just seeing mountains to me, I'm like, I'm so lucky.
And a lot of people coming in the program, I was one of them, have some resentments towards God or whatnot. And really, like my sponsee, I took her to the grotto. We did her second and third step there. And I was like, hey, if you can't get the God thing, but I don't know anyone who doesn't feel spiritual
Mhm.
here. And she was like, this is the spot. She goes there on her own now.
Yeah.
So my daughter feels like it's spiritual. So hopefully we've given you some really good alternatives. If you're not in an AA meeting
Yeah.
or scared to go online and do
Mm.
some of the things, the other things.
Yeah.
Do you have any parting words, Peter? Because you do a lot of this stuff. I see you. Peter has a harvest party and all this other stuff.
Ooh, please
Mhm.
invite me.
Yeah, definitely. That's how it's part of my spiritual, like we were saying, the gardening, being out in nature. When I do have my get-togethers, what has evolved, the program and the people in the program that are now in my life have become my family, my second family. And so when I have Father's Days coming up, I'll probably do another Father's Day barbecue.
Oh, you're
I
gonna
have
make-
the harvest
Oh,
parties.
literally.
And it's a way that then when I grow,
yeah.
I usually incorporate, that's what the harvest party is all about,
Yeah.
incorporating what I've grown into the foods that I serve
Yeah.
to share with my family, my
Aw.
family of choice. That has really, it's all become, I think it's all part of the program. It's part of, the program isn't just, oh, I went to class and I graduated and now I'm cured.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
become a lifestyle for me.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's,
It was already a
Yeah.
lifestyle for me, but thank you, Peter,
Yeah.
for last year's Father's Day, just that he mentioned it. My dad died at 15. And last year with my sponsor here, who's like my dad, I don't really care what anybody says a sponsor should be.
He's definitely a daddy.
Yeah, he's my daddy, and it's nothing sexual. But we celebrated Father's Day here, and Peter's dad had died. And it was the first time I ever celebrated Father's Day. And it was the best day I had. And I tell you this all the time. It was a really good holiday. And Peter has been really kind in letting me be part of his family.
well, part of the fellowship. And so we've all said we go to meetings, and whether they're on Zoom or in person, and meetings are fantastic. But when you do the fellowship, which is maybe it's going to coffee after a meeting, going to lunch, maybe it's having to get together at your house with people that I know you've been to several events that I've been to as well. That is like, I don't know how to describe it. It's the accumulation of everything that this program has given me. You know?
I love Friends in the Park as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and once again, it is like us celebrating and enjoying, taking care of something that, no one else is going to step up and do.
Yeah.
And we're so lucky.
We are.
Every day I feel so lucky just that I survived all the stupid shit that I did.
No, look
Because
at
so
being-
many folks we didn't
Yeah.
get the chance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But also to have another day and to be around folks who are equally, if not way more committed to the work and enjoying our time together.
Yeah.
Thank you. People have been very generous to us
Wow.
with their time.
Yeah. And I appreciate you being here and chit-chatting in my humble abode here with us.
Oh, this is
I have
such
no
a pleasure.
doubt
Such
that-
an honor.
Oh, thank you. I have no doubt that others who listen, there'll be one person, I know for sure, one person at the least that will get
I'm
something
going to tell you,
from
they
it.
text me every week.
Oh.
Just listen to this episode. It was so good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it is. And I know someone who's brand new, and like our podcast is what they listen to a lot.
Thanks again,
Thanks,
Peter, Julie, with Amelia
Yeah.
for a Real Recovery podcast. We'll be back again.
Bye.
Another story.
Bye.
Thanks for listening.
That's a wrap on today's episode. Thanks to each and every one of you for lending us your ears and hearts. Your engagement is what fuels our passion and keeps this podcast thriving.
We cherish the moments we share here and hope they resonate with you, whether you're on a daily commute, at the gym, or just taking a moment for yourself.
Make sure to head over to our website at realrecoverypodcast.com. While you're there, subscribe to our newsletter for the latest insights and uplifting stories from our community delivered straight to your inbox.
Click that subscribe button on your favorite podcast player too, so you can keep up with every new episode. It's your support that keeps our conversation alive and meaningful.
And if our stories have touched you, consider using the donate button on our site. Your contributions, no matter the size, are deeply appreciated. They help us continue our mission of sharing hope and healing.
Join us beyond the podcast and follow our journey on social media. Find us on Instagram, Facebook, and on X, formerly known as Twitter. All the links are on our site, so you can stay connected and be a part of the Real Recovery community every day.
Your likes, shares, and comments not only spread the message of recovery, but also remind us that we're all in this together.
So, until we meet again, remember that recovery is a journey, not a destination, and we'll be here to accompany you every step of the way to recovery, real recovery.
Thanks for listening.